Okay, finally. So good afternoon and welcome, everyone. My name is Marissa Bluestein. I'm an assistant director at the Quattrone Center for the Fair Administration of Justice at the University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School. We present these monthly trainings as part of our TTA under a grant with the Bureau of Justice Assistance under the Upholding the Rule of Law and Preventing Wrongful Convictions program. So every month we offer a topic that is of interest and hopefully helpful to people who are in post-conviction litigation and investigation cases. And because we've been getting so many questions about this issue, I asked our, sorry, Chris, data dude, Chris Hallritz, who is our data analyst consultant, works with our team, who works with conviction integrity units and innocence organizations around the country. I asked him to put together a webinar on using AI ethically to review cases. There are a lot of new artificial intelligence platforms that are coming online. One of the most robust is CoCounsel, and we have Andrew Schulman, who's with CoCounsel here with us today. Thank you, Andrew, to be able to demonstrate that. But because there's so many issues that are kind of tied in with using artificial intelligence online, questions about confidentiality and how do you get informed consent and what about work product, we asked the eminent, maybe, Bruce Green from Fordham Law School to join us. Bruce, of course, is a nationally recognized expert in professional responsibility, particularly in the criminal sphere. So I'm very grateful to Andrew and Bruce for being with us and for others. I'm going to hand it over to Chris in a moment, but I'm going to ask folks to please, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring so that Chris can direct them to the panelists and we'll get started. Thanks. Chris, your turn.
All right. Thank you, Marissa. Okay, so am I back in the PowerPoint now?
You are back in the PowerPoint.
Okay, great. So yes, thank you again for introducing me. Thank you, Andrew and Bruce, for being here today. Thank you all for joining. Excited to have this discussion today. I am Chris Allroots. I recently started with the Quattrone Center this past year. I have an associate's degree in computer information systems and computer science from the Community College of Philadelphia, and also my bachelor's degree with focus on data analytics and social sciences from here at Penn. Before joining the Quattrone Center, I started in IT at Penn Carey Law and worked there for about 7 years in various roles. And I have the privilege, the great honor of working at Quattrone Center and working on some awesome research projects, including building an AI classifier for misconduct. And we're just beginning to start looking at developing and hosting our own private fine-tuned LLMs as well. And another major part of my responsibility is to help BJA grantees, and many of you are interested in investigating and implementing AI. So that's why we're here today. So I wanted to give a quick primer to kind of get us up to speed with where we are in AI and why people are so interested in using it. And how to maximize the benefits of using it. So number one, the very first thing you can do is what you're doing right now, familiarizing yourself and training on the products that are available out there. As you all know, it's a rapidly evolving field, so continuous learning is key. Staying up to date with all of the developments, changes, it can seem overwhelming, but it's important so that you have a good fundamental understanding of what and why you're using the tools. The next way to maximize the benefit of AI is to understand its limits and capabilities. So AI, as we all know, has limits like hallucinations and a lot of capabilities like summarizing vast amounts of text and things like that. So this involves acquiring knowledge about what those benefits and risks are so that you can use them properly. The next item here is choosing the right tools for the specific task. So there's plenty of different tools out there now. You want to make sure that you're choosing the right one for the use case that you want to use it for. There are legal AI tools, there are non-legal AI tools, there are tools that are generative AI, and there are tools that are not generative AI. You want to make sure that you're choosing the right tool for the right task so you can make sure that you're getting the best output. Another way to maximize the benefit is using AI for routine and repetitive tasks. If you find yourself doing something that is routine and repetitive, you should quickly be asking yourself, can I get AI to do this for me? Many times you can write a prompt that will help with a repetitive or routine task that you can then save in a Word file and then use that prompt over and over again. Some systems will allow you to save the reusable prompts within the actual AI platform itself. Another huge important thing to do is to independently verify and review all AI output. Tools are getting better at reducing hallucinations and giving you accurate output, but they still can hallucinate, and it is your job as the operator of the tool to independently verify and review that AI output before you share it with anybody else or put it into use.
Chris, could you just explain what you mean by hallucinating, please?
Of course.
You may not be familiar with the term.
So hallucinating is something that happens with LLMs or large language models where they can output based on your prompt what seems to be very convincing and looks to be, coherent information, but it can be completely factually incorrect. The way that's the nature of how these tools work. They are capable of also producing factual information, but because the way that they're trained on data, they are all just predicting probable words for you. So sometimes the next probable word in the algorithm is not actually a factual word, but it just looks really good and it will almost always look convincing. And if you're not aware that it can hallucinate, you might be at risk of believing what it tells you. In when you shouldn't. So it's important to always verify and review their AI output. Now, that was pretty scary what I just said. I think if you'll find yourself, again, going back to just familiarizing yourself with the tools, I think if you start using the tools for mundane tasks, have it create your grocery list, have it tell you which aisles you need to have it create your grocery list by which aisle in the grocery store you want to go shopping in, and you'll start to kind of see, well, it gets these types of things right, or these type of things right, or these type of things wrong. Different tools have different capabilities and might hallucinate in different ways. So really familiarizing yourself with the tools is going to be a great way to reduce the risk of you getting caught using something that was a hallucination. And then also, lastly, is always, again, just independently and verifying and reviewing the AI output. So I know that Andrew will probably have some great tips about how CodeCancel can help you do that going forward. So the better tools will have ways that you can that will help you independently verify and review AI output. But yes, hallucinations are a big deal in the AI world. You'll hear about them a lot, and uh, it's something that you just have to be aware of when using these tools. So the next topic here is ethical considerations in client communications. That's kind of why we're here today, is to talk about some of the ethics that go into using these tools. There's been some recent publications that we're hoping Bruce will enlighten us about, and we'll talk about some of those and how you can be sure that you're not breaching any ethical considerations. Um, Another way to maximize the benefit of AI is make sure that your supervisors and they're aware that it is a new responsibility to supervise the use of AI in your workplace. You need to make sure that your colleagues are aware of the risks that come with using these tools and understand how that impacts the work that they're doing with the tools. And then lastly, maximizing the benefit of AI is to always remember that it is a supplement. It is not to replace anybody. It is to help you do your job better. And it will, right now, it doesn't seem like it's replacing anybody. You can quickly trick it or make it do things that a normal human would not do. So as it stands right now, it's a great tool to augment your workflows, improve them, make you more efficient, but it's not replacing anybody right now. So the next slide here. Okay, So one of the biggest topics that comes up when people are looking into using AI tools is how to handle confidential client information. And so I made a few bullet points about that. The most important is understanding the AI tools data handling. And this starts with reviewing their terms of use and other relevant documentation. Most of the good AI tools will also have a trust center. Two great examples of trust centers that I like to point to are Anthropic's Claude, has a great trust center, and ChatGPT. They're kind of setting the standards for what a lot of this documentation should look like. So I recommend checking those out and comparing them with other tools. Um, some of the wording in there might be a little technical, but you can kind of start to see a lot of the protocols and accreditations that these companies are using to make people feel safe and secure.
So
Um,
there is a question in the chat, Chris, which I think is going to be aimed toward Bruce. The big question is how is all this purported efficiency and time saving from AI mitigated or completely canceled out by the required intensity of user review? And I think that's so I think in light of, and Ryan, if I'm saying this wrong, please feel free to unmute and correct me. But in light of all the kind of work that has to be gone into to make sure that things are accurate, is it worth it? Ryan, if I got that right, put a thumbs in the chat or correct me in the chat. But that's part of the question that they're asking.
sure. So, I mean, I think to speak to like the kind of cost of learning these tools, I think many of these tools are going to give free trainings and provide a ton of free resources for you to learn and educate yourself about how to operate them effectively. So I think that's a quick way to get acclimated with the product. Um, and yeah, I think once you start seeing the places where it can save you time and you start finding those repetitive tasks that it really does handle extremely quickly, then you'll start to kind of see the efficiency outweighing the cost. Once you learn the fundamentals and the basics of any tool, you'll quickly start experimenting and leveling up your ability and knowledge of them very, very fast. And then you can decide, if it's worth it or not. If you haven't dived in all the way yet, I would recommend, viewing a few of the different platforms that you're thinking about and seeing what their training documentation and offerings look like to make sure that it doesn't look like it's going to be something too complicated for you to pick up and learn.
Can I take a crack at this, Marissa?
Please.
Oh, okay. So I should confess that I will be so I have colleagues who are first adopters. I like to think of myself as a last adopter. So I would say that first of all, nobody has to use AI. There is technology that eventually becomes so standard that if you don't use it, you're not going to be competent. So email, for example, I think lawyers need to know how to use, or how to create electronic documents, or maybe do internet searches, etc. And I should say now I'm actually cribbing this from the American Bar Association Ethics Committee's opinion number 512 from July 2024, which you might have distributed. I don't know, Marissa, if you did.
I'm going to put it in the chat right now.
Okay, so I chair the ethics committee, and if I didn't chair it at the time when it issued this opinion, I would know even less about AI than I do now. But one of the points the opinion makes is, it may be that you have an ethical obligation to know in general terms what's out there, so that if there's something out there that would make you a more efficient, effective, better lawyer, you can make a choice whether to adopt it. But there's a lot of ways to do work. If you're like some of my colleagues, you might want to be the first or second adopter. But on some of this stuff, you could wait to see how things shake out with law firms. Maybe law firms will be the first adopters, and they'll figure out what preserves your confidences and what's going to violate confidentiality, or what's going to hallucinate and what's not going to hallucinate, or what are the best practices in this area. And then you can glom on to what they're doing. I mean, you don't have to, I don't read instructions to anything. Frankly, and if I were to read the terms of use, I wouldn't understand them. And so while you can't adopt, we'll talk more about confidentiality, you can't adopt this stuff and use it and input client confidences if you don't know that they're going to be protected. But you don't have to use this stuff this year. You could wait a year, or you could wait to see how things shake out. So that's my answer to this. I don't make any money off anybody's adoption of any of these tools, so I can be a Luddite.
Thanks, Bruce. Chris, want to jump back in?
Sure. Yeah. I totally agree with Bruce that it's, you don't have to use these tools. That being said, I think there were probably people that didn't want to use email back then or switch over from typewriters. And I think AI is quickly coming into our workplace. So understanding things like the simple things like hallucinations and stuff is a great way to, start to understand some of the risks that might come up when you do finally start using it. Another way that if you just want to get your feet wet is to jump right into the next bullet point here is anonymizing client information. So if you have some documents you would
I'm sorry, Chris, can you just advance a little bit, because we're still at maximizing the benefits of AI.
Oh. Is this?
Yep, that's better. Thank you.
So anonymizing client information and is another way for you to get your feet wet with using test or demo documentation to understand the risks and capabilities. So if you have some simple cases or documents to anonymize, you can throw them in there and see what it can do.
Can I jump in here again? And I mean, if it's annoying, let me know. So we could talk more about protecting confidential information. And of course, if you don't input confidential information of your clients, then it's not an issue. But I just want to point out that anonymizing client information is not always the same as not inputting confidential information. So, for example, if I were to tell you, I'm representing the mayor of a city who recently negotiated a deal to have the charges dismissed in exchange for, cooperating with the administration on immigration stuff. I'm not going to tell you who it is. That doesn't really protect the client's information, because people can figure out, trace things to the client. So there's a lot of ways where if you input if you input aggregated client information, it's more likely that you're not inputting confidential information. But often anonymized information, just if you leave out the name, is not going to save you from inputting confidential information, because if you put in factual detail, that's a problem. And in fact, another recent ABA opinion is about lawyers using listservs and asking questions on listservs that don't disclose the name of the client, but you can actually often infer who the client is from the question, because people's clientele,
right.
And then that becomes a problem. So I just wanted to, Chris is doing a great job. I just wanted to point out that sort of caveat.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. That's a great point about the listservs too. There's so many. I mean, I think this conversation about AI could just be, so many aspects of it could just be general conversations about technology in general. So thank you so much for that insight there. On the next topic here of protecting confidential client information is, and this isn't an option for everybody that doesn't have an IT team, but if you do have an IT team, consulting with them, understanding where your data currently is, what tools are available to you that might be using AI now. That's a great way to improve your security stance is to have an ongoing conversation with your IT team, and if needed, bring in cybersecurity experts or ourselves. I'm happy to meet with you and advise, look over terms of service with you, discuss any AI products that you might be looking into and what some of the risks might be in integrating them with your workflows. Another big thing is to avoid the public and free platforms. They're almost definitely going to be processing your information. If you're not paying for it, you are the product, as you've probably heard before, similar to social media. So if if you're using the free version of ChatGPT or other products, you're almost definitely having your data be recycled and trained on. So you definitely don't want to put any confidential client information into a free or public system there.
Chris, could you go back to I'm not sure you talked enough about the second slide, the one of ensuring the provider does not share inputted information or
Sure.
use it for training, because I think that was the key to the ABA ethics opinion. If you have if you're using something like, I assume, Lexis, that doesn't share your inquiries or preserve them, then you're home free. But if you could explain what sort of like a self-learning tool is and how it uses and may spit out information, and then how you tell which is which, and whether you can trust people who market these things, that would be, I think, useful.
Sure. So, unfortunately, a lot of it goes into reviewing their terms of service and with a fine tooth comb to see what they say they are training your data on. And that is a more difficult task than maybe one bullet point can cover. Some of these products have multiple terms of service, or they're kind of gathered under an umbrella of it can take a while to go through these terms of service, but that's where you really have to find out the information about what they're doing with your data. I'm not sure, and if somebody else on the call knows a way to check, like while you're using a tool, I don't know that many of them will say kind of actively, we're using your data for training. I know some of them, like CoCounsel, for instance, have an opt-out that says like, don't sell anything to anybody, any of my personal information to anything, even not the training stuff, but they don't train on your prompt inputs too. So you really have to go in there and understand the tools that you're using within the platform that you're using and what data you're inputting to those tools and what they say they can do with it. So ensuring that means, you don't want to see anything about them training on your data or them sharing it with third parties in the terms of service. Does that answer your question, Bruce?
I think so.
Cool. So jumping into, I'm going to kind of speed up a little bit here so we have time for Andrew, but I wanted to quickly mention there was some news about DeepSeek, perhaps you all heard recently, and so I wanted to just plant this idea of open source versus open weight models and what that means. Open source means that it provides complete access to all of the components needed for reproducibility. So open source means that you should have access to the training data, the model architecture, and you should theoretically know how to completely recreate that model. DeepSeek is not open source. It is open weight. So they did not provide access to the training data, model architecture, or ability to retrain. They just gave you the weights. So open weights means that you can download those weights and deploy the model, but you wouldn't know exactly what data went into it. So it's just something that these are terms that are going to come up as more of these models emerge. And then closed and proprietary are models like Claude or ChatGPT, where you don't have access to the training or the weights. So you could not deploy ChatGPT on your own. A few more helpful terms here are RAG, or retrieval augmented generation. Basically what this is just a database layer that gets put on top of a lot of these new AI tools that helps improve the output quality and reduces hallucination. So if you see a tool's using RAG, it's probably a little bit more accurate than a tool that's not using it. And then agentic AI is an AI tool that can actively take actions on behalf of the user, like using tools or skills. So you can think of agentic AI as more of an assistant than a chatbot. It can actually carry out kind of actions or skills on behalf of a user. OpenAI did just release an agentic program. I have not used it myself yet, but I have used other agentic software where you can kind of plug in an AI and let it control your computer, and it's really cool stuff to see. So I think that's a buzzword that's coming up a lot in AI communities, and I think we'll all start seeing more about agentic AI. And then I just quickly wanted to plug a few AI experts that I follow to stay kind of in touch with everybody. They're both affiliated with Penn. One is Ethan Mollick, who is a professor at Wharton. He's a great follow on LinkedIn. He posts a lot of academic style articles and in posts about AI. So if you're looking for more stuff about like research and academic style articles, he's a great follow. And then Allie Miller, who also is a Wharton grad, she is a great follow for more of the consumer facing AI stuff. I like to follow her. She'll always have pieces about the latest updates from all of the major AI products like OpenAI and ChatGPT or Anthropic and Claude and all of them. She'll have updates on their latest features and product offerings. So she's a great follow. Those are two people where I get the latest updates from on what's happening in the world of AI. So with that being said, I would like to pass it over to Andrew. Thank you for joining us today, Andrew. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. Can everyone hear me okay? Great, thanks. I've been having some technical difficulties, so this was very good timing. So yeah, my name is Andrew Schulman. I work at Thomson Reuters, and I'm what's called a customer success manager. And in this role, my entire responsibility is I work with legal service organizations, which includes traditional legal aid, veterans groups, indigenous rights, and of course, innocence and wrongful conviction organizations. And my job in that capacity essentially is to train folks how to use Thomson Reuters AI platform called CoCounsel, make sure folks are learning best practices, answering their questions, finding ways to apply it to their day-to-day work. And then of course, getting feedback so we can both improve how we train folks and actually improve the platform itself. So, if we're seeing the same request for functionality, that kind of thing. Now, before I joined Thomson Reuters, I was a practicing attorney. I lived in Denver, Colorado, and I had a small practice where I primarily did public criminal defense, doing post-conviction work and appellate work. So I got to dabble in some innocence work, which was honestly the highlight of the work I was doing. I think, is that on me? Okay. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. So yeah, in a past life, I practiced for about 4 years, and I really wanted to stick with legal service organizations. So it's a privilege to be here today. And as I mentioned, again, I only work with legal service organizations, and I've had the chance to meet Chris through this work. And I've gotten to work with a couple innocence organizations. And I'm going to demo CoCounsel today, show you some of the skills that are available. Hopefully I'll be able to answer some questions if those come up as well. But briefly before I do, I just kind of want to highlight some of the what we call use cases that our innocence organization clients have been using. And use cases by I mean is like, how are they using AI to solve a problem, right? A use case is a problem, and that can be varying complexity, right? That can be drafting an email to an investigator all the way through, working on a habeas petition. So in this capacity, we have worked with organizations to help them draft those habeas petitions, from table of authorities and contents to checking records for citations, to actually drafting, statements of facts, statements of law, conduct legal research. One of my favorite stories is we have a client, and she was at a hearing with a client, and the judge asked a legal question. They didn't have the answer off the top of their head, and neither did opposing counsel. So she just asked the question in our generative AI platform and was able to give an answer to the judge, and kind of, got herself on good footing in that situation. I genuinely will say, I kick myself at least once a week thinking, would I still be practicing if I had had AI when I was practicing? Because just the problems it solved for me and the things it's allowed me to automate or at least expedite has been tremendous. Whether it was like reviewing thousands of pages of medical records over the course of a week, or, you have a case where your client's been to trial 2 or 3 different times, how can we process all those transcripts extremely quickly? So I genuinely think that this can be transformative for your work, particularly in the sense of, how much time it actually takes to work on a case, the number of clients that you can serve at a time. I know intake can always be a big issue, right? Processing those intake applications. And again, automating some of that more tedious work that doesn't necessarily require your lawyering skills to complete. That's where I think generative AI can play a really big role. And I say that because I don't think AI is going to replace lawyers. I don't think it can. I don't think it should. But it can sort of help expedite some of the issues and some of that work that is better outsourced, frankly. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. That was the technical difficulty I was having, but I'm going to share my screen. And what we're going to do is I'm just going to walk you really briefly through a quick demo, and we're going to use, CoCounsel has about 8 or 9 core skills. We're going to use about 6 of them. And the general premise here is, you've received this intake application. You've agreed to represent this individual. You want to review those transcripts that you've received from his trial and really narrow in on some of the witness statements, and then, get with your investigator, send them an email. And I just kind of want to demo just to give you a sense of how fast some of this work can become. And I will also say this is, again, just because we're writing an email with generative AI, just because we're reviewing transcripts doesn't mean you're not going to want to go and read the most important parts of the transcripts. It doesn't mean you're not going to want to polish up that email. So I say that just as a reminder that this isn't a replacement. It's really just a tool of support. So without further ado, let me pull this up. All right. Can you see my screen, Chris? If you could give me a nod or something. Can you see?
Not quite yet. I don't see it on my end, but I'm.
Oh, I'll try again. Give me 1 sec.
There it comes.
Great.
Yep, we're up now.
Thanks, folks. Sorry about that. So like I said, yeah, we're gonna demo some of the skills in CoCounsel. This is what it would look like when you sign on. The client here is Hakeem Bond. Chris was kind enough to share some transcripts with me. And so the first skill I want to show you, and basically what I'll do today is I'll run a skill. I'll talk about sort of like the intricacies of the skill while it's running, show you the output, and we'll just kind of go through that step by step. It shouldn't take more than 15 or 20 minutes at the most. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to upload those transcripts, or excuse me, upload the database where those transcripts live. And I picked this workflow in particular because I think it highlights a lot of the skills that you as innocence lawyers, wrongful conviction lawyers are going to be using pretty frequently. And so I'm going to select an entire database. So in CoCounsel, you're able to create databases. You can store hundreds of documents, thousands of pages at a time. You can search all of them at once. So this is a really great way to do some macro level inquiry, right? So if you have a database and you're trying to find, you've received files from opposing counsel or from your client, and you have hundreds of documents and you just want to find medical information, right? This is where the database function is going to come in handy because it's going to go through that database and find everything for you. So here I want to know who
Right, I'm
testified.
sorry, Andrew, I'm just popping in to say, if it wasn't clear to folks, the database is what you create with the documents that you upload, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah, so what you do is, and while I run the skill, I'll talk a little bit more about it. Essentially what you can do is in CoCounsel, we have a function where you can upload up to 100 gigabytes essentially of documents that you want. Those documents are then OCR'd so they become searchable. This includes documents that are in foreign languages. It includes handwritten text. So if it's legible to the human eye, it's going to be legible to CoCounsel, which for any of you who have processed intake, that can be a very big deal. And it can even, because it OCRs, it can pick up words that might be in images. So it's not like an AI like we now have on our iPhones where it tells you what describes the picture. But if there are any words in the picture, it could tell you what those words are. And so what CoCounsel does is it also understands context. So that means if you say, if you have a client and, they were accused of arson, for example, and you want to find all the information on arson that's in your database, it's not just going to look for the word arson. It understands context, so it's going to look for fire. It's going to look for smoke. It's going to look for burning, right? It's going to look at the larger context of what you're asking about and give you an output based on that. And so when you search your database, what CoCounsel is going to do is it's going to give us this output right here. It's usually a paragraph answering our question. And the great thing is, I think Chris mentioned this. Again, this is when I was having technical difficulties, so forgive me, but I think Chris was talking about hallucinations and RAG technologies, the way we avoid some of those issues. CoCounsel is always going to show its work. That's what these footnotes are here. So we got our paragraph explaining who testified. If we click on view all footnotes, what's going to happen is we are going to get the quotations from those transcripts that CoCounsel relied on when it wrote this answer for us. So we can scroll through here and see the documents it relied on, what quotes it relied on. Now, if we actually want to see the text itself, we can click that hyperlink, or you could click any of these numbered hyperlinks here. We'll get a pop-out window, and what it's going to show you here in a minute is it's going to show you the actual page from the transcript. And it's also going to highlight the language it relied on. So this is a really nice way, again, rather than you having to read every transcript, every single word, is you can do some narrowing using CoCounsel and then jump right into the transcript. You can always download this as a Word document. It's going to have all the footnotes in there as well, so you have a nice document to work with when it's time for whatever next steps you're going to take. But let's say we've run this. We know who these witnesses are now. We know which transcripts we need to pull up from our database. So we're going to pull those into the chat. And now, again, let's say you've never read these. You've only read the intake file. You kind of have a sense from Mr. Bond about what went wrong in his case, and you just kind of want to get a better sense of what the witnesses actually said at trial. So what we do is we go into our database and we can pull things directly into our chat. And I'm going to pull these 3 documents because these were the 3 days that the prosecutor's witnesses testified. And then I'm going to copy and paste those prompts so you don't have to sit here and watch me type. And what I'll do is I'm just going to run this. And again, we'll talk a little bit about the skill while it runs. CoCounsel has a skill called summarize. You can do general summaries or you can do targeted summaries. So you could just say, summarize these transcripts for me. It would give you a super general, high-level overview of what happened during the trial. But we can also do targeted summaries, right? We can say, I only really want to know, for example, in this case, focus on the evidence provided by those who testified against Mr. Bond. So it's going to give us a narrower summary. We can tell it, how we want it formatted and how we want it organized. And the other thing is, I think this is really important, is we always want to give CoCounsel a little bit of context. I think with generative AI in general, this isn't just a CoCounsel thing. You want to kind of contour the information you're providing because you're going to get better results that way. And so what we did here is, again, we're just asking CoCounsel to read through these documents word by word and pull all the information about the various people who may have testified during his trial. CoCounsel is going to give you this in real time. Right now it's working, it's about 90%. But as you can see, as we scroll through here, we can see all the various folks who testified. Again, we're going to get these footnotes. So if you want to check its work, if you see something that's particularly interesting, there's a fact that you really want to dig more into, you click on this footnote, jump into the transcript, and maybe read the back and forth with the attorney. And we can keep going here and continue to go through this. And the person we're going to focus on today for the sake of this demo is Patricia Gooding, who is the mother of the person who got killed. And she testified at trial. And this is the information that, and it's done, which is why I just jumped into the top of the page. But CoCounsel is going to give us, a little blurb about, what she said during the trial. Again, we could have asked for this in paragraph format. CoCounsel picked the format for us because we didn't specify. But the next thing I want to know is, what Patricia Gooding said, and I want to make sure I'm using the right documents. Because I've done this a couple times, I know that she testified on the 17th, so I'm just going to upload that single transcript from our database. And we'll run that really quick. And again, that will just make things go a little faster. So we'll pull that into the chat here. And what we're going to do next is we're going to ask some really specific questions, and this is called the document review skill. So the way that the search a database skill, you can ask macro level questions. The review document skill is micro level questions. So we're only using one document, again, for the sake of moving this along, but you could ask up to about 30 questions at a time with up to 200 documents at a time. So really voluminous work. So if you're reviewing transcripts or medical records, you have very pinpoint questions you want to ask. This would be the skill you would use. Again, like with all our other skills, you're going to get footnotes. You could give it formatting instructions. Here we just asked 3 questions because we want to move through this quickly. But this is probably one of the skills that our attorneys, particularly innocence attorneys, love the most. I worked with some folks who had a eyewitness identification case, and there were like 6 different versions of what shirt the defendant was wearing, right? There were all these different eyewitness accounts of what the defendant was wearing at the time of the shooting. So we used the review function to ask all these really granular questions about the witnesses who saw these shirts and then the shirt itself. And it gave us this nice chart that identified the different color, the different pattern, the different size, whether it was tucked in, whether it was pulled out. So co-counsel, because it's reading every word, is going to give us really specific information. Here, co-counsel just gave us, 3 paragraphs. Each paragraph is going to be answering each one of our questions here. Again, we'll get footnotes so we can look at the original information. But this is a really nice skill when you need to process a ton of information. And I would say, again, this was really fast. If you're doing a lot of questions with a lot of documents, you might go grab a cup of coffee while that's running. But it's going to take 15 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe an hour, but not a week. So that's how I kind of like to think about it, is how much time are you getting back, even when it takes a little bit of time in the platform. The next thing I want to do is, because I'm going to ask my investigator to interview Patricia Gooding, is I want to generate some questions for her that my investigator can ask. So we're going to use a skill which I think is a complete misnomer. It's called prep for a deposition. And what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to enter my prompt. I'm going to ask co-counsel to brainstorm some questions that I can ask Patricia Gooding about that testimony she gave at trial. I say it's a misnomer because we have folks who use this skill to generate questions for depositions, but also for hearings. If they're meeting with an expert and just have questions about the report they wrote, they can have co-counsel read the report and generate questions that way. So again, it's a bit of a misnomer, and it looks like it didn't run the skill. So co-counsel is not perfect. I will admit that. And so we are going to just upload that document one more time from our database and run that skill one more time. And so what I'll do is we'll pop this back in. Oh, it actually did run. It heard me talking back. So it got its stuff together. But that's our prep for a deposition skill right there. So what it's going to do is it's going to come up with these categories for us. It's going to generate this like big list of questions that we can use. I say this skill is a great starting point. And something you may have noticed when we ran this skill is I just said relying on the document review you completed. So as you've noticed, I only uploaded the documents once or twice, and I'm referring back to things that happened back in the chat. Co-counsel has what's called a long context window, or a working memory. In layman's terms, I call it a working memory. I think it's easier to think about that way. But essentially what it can do is you can just refer to things that you've done in the chat rather than having to re-upload documents every time you want to use a skill. And we call it stacking. So you can stack skills, particularly for these more complex use cases. You can say, using that summary you wrote me earlier, or using the documents I uploaded earlier, now complete this task for me. So it's a really nice way to string skills together. And believe it or not, all that time you save just not having to upload documents, downloading them, adding them back in the chat, that really adds up over time. So it's a really nice skill to have. But anyways, we have our prep for deposition questions. They gave us a lot. Again, we can always amend the outputs that we're getting. So this is pretty robust. So let's say our investigator is short on time. We can say, please shorten by half, right? And co-counsel is just going to rewrite this list for us. It's going to give us half the questions we initially asked for. It's going to chop. Yeah, go ahead, Chris. Sorry,
Andrew. I'm sorry. I'm just so we give Bruce time to talk a little bit. I want to ask you to chop some of your time in half here, like you just asked co-counsel to. One thing I wanted to get you to show before you end the demo, would you mind scrolling up and downloading one of the cited documents? I think that is one of the coolest features that I know I use with co-counsel a lot, where you were going up and it was actually giving you the citations. I thought it was so cool the first time I realized you could download it as a Word document. Also, if you ask co-counsel to give you a spreadsheet, it will give you an Excel spreadsheet too.
Mm-hmm.
And within the Word document itself, or the spreadsheet, it is just so nicely formatted. The footnotes are all there. It makes it incredibly easy to read. So I used co-counsel in preparing for this conversation, and I had it prepare questions for Andrew and Bruce based off of the Opinion 512 and stuff like that. So, but I used the ability to download it as a Word document, so I could easily kind of like put it on my phone, bring it up, read it in bed, and it just made it really wonderful experience to review the documents. But But yeah, thank you so much, Andrew, for showing all of this.
Yeah, of course. I don't know
And
what
Andrew,
happened
there
to
were,
my.
I'm sorry, in the chat, there were a couple of questions just about access. So, and we're at the University of Pennsylvania Carey Law School. Our agreement, whatever it is with Westlaw, allows us access to co-counsel. But some in the chat were saying that they have a different level, different tier of access, like Edge, and that therefore they don't.
Sure.
Can you talk a bit about the access for people who are associated with law schools, as well as if there's any ability for a small organization that's not affiliated with a law school, and certainly a prosecutor's office that's not affiliated with a law school, to be able to access
Yeah.
that potentially reduced rate?
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. And really quickly, just go back to Chris's original request. This is what Microsoft Word output looks like. So this is the review document skill we use. It gave us our output, and then it gives us all our footnotes here. This is what all your documents are going to look like. Same thing with the spreadsheet, except your footnotes would be just in a different tab. And then the other skills I didn't show you were drafting, compare documents, which can be great. For example, if you have two witnesses testifying about something, pull out all the inconsistencies for me. And then the other one's going to be timeline and AR-assisted research, so you can do some legal research through Westlaw. But yeah, Marissa, to your question or the questions in the chat, there are a few different tiers. So we have Co-Counsel Core, which is all the skills I just demoed for you. We have Co-Counsel integrated with AI-assisted research, so you can access Westlaw legal resources through Co-Counsel. Then there's Westlaw Precision, and that is like the typical Westlaw platform with AI integration. So you can ask questions in the traditional AI sense. It has a couple other AI functionalities, including, we can do a brief check, like you can review citations to see if they're up to date, if what opposing counsel said about those citations is accurate, 50-state jurisdictional surveys. And then in terms of access, so right now we have a program, I'm one of the program managers, it's called AI for Justice. And it is a special pricing model specifically for legal service organizations. So these are nonprofit, non-governmental organizations, so innocence organizations, legal aid. For a prosecutor's office or a public defender's office, that is what's considered a government account. So prices are always negotiable with our sales team, but that does not fall within the AI for Justice program. Within the AI for Justice program, right now I believe it's $50 a seat for Co-Counsel Core, so just those core skills, and then another $50 if you want to integrate Westlaw Precision and drafting. Drafting is a plugin for Microsoft Word that adds some additional drafting functionality to Co-Counsel. So it gives you, like, I think drafting discovery demands or responses, I think, is like the big thing for litigators in Co-Counsel drafting. So if you were to get the whole bundle, it'd be about $100 a seat a month. And right now that's been running since October, and we've had several organizations sign up for it, including at least one Innocence Center. But yeah, I'm happy to. I can provide my email address in the chat. You can always reach out to Thomson Reuters as well. But yeah, thank you for letting me demo. Sorry I went long, Chris.
That's
okay. No, I think I was the one who went long in the beginning there. But thank you so much, Andrew. That was wonderful, and thanks for showing the Word document as well. I think that's such a nice feature to be able to share your output with other people quickly and easily.
Right. And to be clear, this is not meant to be a standing advertisement for Co-Counsel or for Westlaw.
Totally.
But just to demonstrate that there are possibilities out there for folks to be able to look at different ways of reviewing your cases, particularly when you have voluminous documents like trial transcripts or others that you can start to look for to try to make those transitions a little bit easier. And I want to kind of move this over to the ethical side and kind of take advantage of having Bruce with us here, who's kind of thought about this stuff. So Bruce, what Andrew was just showing us was public documents, right? Transcripts, which are they're not protected, they're not public. Are there any ethical concerns from your perspective or the bar's perspective in terms of uploading public documents and using an AI to kind of look through that? Let's start with there.
So I guess the question is whether the public documents are client confidential information. And the answer may differ depending upon what jurisdiction you're in. But at least in the model rule world, and you can tell me, what Pennsylvania says, information relating to the representation is protected by your confidentiality duty. So it doesn't matter if it's, first of all, I don't know what these documents are. If they're deposition transcripts, they're not public in the sense that it's not the Wall Street Journal, for example. They're not
Right.
generally known, so that they may or may not be available to the press or to the world, but they're not. But there's still information relating to the representation that lawyers have an obligation to keep confidential. So I don't think the line is public or not public. It's confidential or not confidential. In my state, you're allowed to disclose some stuff that's relating to the representation if it's not privileged, which this wouldn't have been, and if its disclosure won't be embarrassing or detrimental to the client, and the client hasn't specifically said don't disclose it. So that's a different definition. But in the model rule states, this would be confidential information. So the question I would have had, for Andrew is, when you're all done, done with this, what happens to that information? Is it deleted by the platform or the tool or whatever you want to call it? Is it not deleted? Is it stored in some way that a human could get access to it? Is it stored in some way that people who use this platform for something else other than reviewing their own documents might get access to, and I'm not trying to just asking about co-counsel, because these are questions I think, as Chris points out, you really have to ask about any platform you're using, and you might have a very quick and easy answer for co-counsel. But as Chris suggests, it may not be such an easy answer, even reading the terms of use for some other platform. So I don't know if you want to, answer as to co-counsel at least.
Yeah. So really quickly, user data is owned by the user. We can't use it to train models. It's always encrypted. It's stored on servers. When a user deletes their account or deletes it off the platform, it's gone forever. I kind of describe data as living in a black box when you put it into co-counsel.
So I would think, and Chris, you could tell me if you would agree, that if you're inputting things into co-counsel and it's only for your use and then it's deleted, unless Andrew is snookering you, that doesn't raise confidentiality problems, because it's not only is it not accessible to third-party users, it's not even accessible to others in your office who might get the information, then inadvertently disclose it. But Chris, I just want you to confirm that, because I'd be helpful to know if you agree.
Yeah, so some of the terms that you'll hear floating around are like encrypted in transit, at rest, and everything. And, Andrew has a wonderful way of describing it very in layman's terms that are very nice. It's not, they can't even access it if you don't want to. So some of those, I hesitated to put too much technical information in my slides about what to look for on the Trust Center, but you'll see some of those terms pop up in some of the protocols that the better companies are using. They'll be on their Trust Center information. And when you start to see some of those badges and some of that terminology, you start to quickly become more comfortable using those services. So that's why, it might be a lot of words to sift through in their terms of use for these products. But if you can kind of pinpoint some of the key things that you're looking for, then you can usually find the key sentence about whether it's training on your data or whether it's encrypted or not pretty quickly in the terms of service.
I will say that the ABA opinion, other opinions don't say lawyers may not use self-learning, GAI tools, right? So it's, in theory, you could use them and not input confidential information. And you could also use them with client consent, even if there's a risk that the information will be accessible to another user, maybe even opposing counsel, if what you're putting in is innocuous, or in this case, maybe not non-confidential, but it's available to the other side for sure. It's deposition transcripts. So if you wanted to, you may not want the other side to have access to your inquiries. But if you're willing to take the risk and your client is willing to take the risk, then you can use even self-learning tools but you need the client's informed consent.
Right. And I do want to get to that in a second, Bruce, but there's kind of a related question, I think, which is in terms of, it may not violate confidentiality, or it may violate confidentiality by to upload to a third party like CoCounsel or another LLM, but does that waive confidentiality for any other purposes outside of that limit? So could another party argue that, well, you used an LLM, therefore you have waived the confidentiality, and it's kind of all game now?
So maybe the question isn't waiving confidentiality, but waiving privilege. I mean, if the other side has this stuff, they have the stuff, whether it's confidential or not, and they can use it. But I think if, you'd really be crazy to put in attorney-client privilege information, because I think the risk is that you would waive the privilege, at least with respect to that information, whether it's a subject matter waiver. I don't know. If you did it, you probably did it inadvertently. You're not using it as a sword and shield or whatever. So there's, I have there's whole treatises about attorney-client privilege. So you can't really answer that question in the abstract. But I mean, if you're putting in sensitive information of any kind into a self-learning tool, then that really is something to think about.
And so you're talking about anything that might be work product, anything that, certainly any communications directly with the client, anything in that realm.
Yeah, or anything you just don't want someone to know. And
you mentioned about informed consent. So if you just kind of give us a little bit of a background about that, I would hope we all know what you mean by that in terms of needing informed consent, but so explaining what you mean by that in this context, and what might an attorney need to be talking to the client about in order to obtain informed consent to be able to use one of these tools?
Yeah. So again, if it's, I don't know if a closed system is the right word. If it's a system where you're not putting information at risk, then that's a different issue. And presumably you're using it as a tool and not, to substitute for your own exercise of professional judgment. But if you're using it the way Andrew's describing, as a tool, and there's not a confidentiality risk, then I don't think you need informed consent any more than when you do, Westlaw research or, whatever. But if it's something where you're putting confidential information at risk, the client in general is entitled to know, and certainly if it's going to lead to disclosure of confidential information. And so, what is informed consent in this context is really difficult, because it's, explaining how you're going to use the tool, the extent to which you're disclosing confidential information. That might be easy, but it's also disclosing the extent of the risk. And I don't know, I wouldn't know what the extent of the risk is, because, again, I'm not a specialist in this area. One of the things the ABA opinion suggests is, you can read the terms of use, but you might want to rely on your IT person or some specialist in the area, or maybe there's writings about this that you can rely on. But I don't know, A, how you know what the extent of the risk is, or B, how you explain it to the client. And now, talking about your clients, the clients of the people online here, informed consent about anything, when you're talking about individuals and not sophisticated, general counsel or whatever, is always tricky. And, they haven't gone to law school and et cetera. So I don't know, Marissa, you might have a view on that, about how you explain it. And Chris or Andrew might have a view about how you assess the risk that the information that you input is going to be accessed by somebody and used to the disadvantage of the client, because I don't know how you figure that out.
So Andrew, you're kind of nodding on that. Do you want to jump in on that part of this?
Sure. Yeah, really quickly. I think the first one is kind of like Bruce was, the first question you always ask, I think, is it an open system or a closed system, right? Like ChatGPT, where it's going to train its LLM based on the information that's being uploaded. That enormous red flag. Beyond that, though, having someone like an IT specialist, I think, is great. We always talk to our folks about the audits that we're subject to, security protocols that we use, which is a lot of tech specs. But again, I think that's kind of like what a IT specialist is there for, what someone like Chris is there for. And I also think like we have a dedicated trust team. So they also, I think, responsible AI companies are going to have people who are literally committed on their team to privacy and security, can answer those hyper granular questions that I necessarily can't answer, right? I've been asked questions about certain security protocols. I'm like, I'm going to pass this to our experts. So I think part of it is just like, how seriously is the company you're working with taking it?
And there's a question in the chat that I think I know what the answer is going to be based on that, which is, for states that have very broad public records, and this is particularly for the prosecutors who are watching, what are the implications that they need to worry about in terms of, are they now sharing and creating a whole new area by which they would have to respond to an open records request?
Great question. I don't know the answer.
I noticed that Andrew went on mute for that one, so.
Yeah. What do
I
you
don't know
think,
the answer
Marissa?
either.
Okay. I mean, I think this is all kind of like, we're still in the somewhat Wild West, which is actually the title of one of the articles that I put up in the box link for folks to access, that we're still kind of trying to figure our way through. But in that vein, Bruce, if you were to say, here are some guidelines that you as an innocence organization or a conviction integrity unit or prosecutor's office should use in terms of interacting ethically and safely with an AI and LLM, and let's keep it on a closed system like CoCounsel as opposed to ChatGPT, what would be some of the primary recommendations that you would have?
I mean, honestly, at this point in the development of this stuff, partly because, it's so much in a state of flux, I would just stick with closed systems for now. I wouldn't, or put it this way, I wouldn't input confidential information in anything but a closed system. I wouldn't use ChatGPT or any self-learning tool that's going to spit out for other people's benefit the stuff that you put in. I don't think you need it. I don't think it gives you such an advantage. I think the risks are unknown. I think explaining the risk to a client are very, very difficult. So I would wait for the world to progress a little bit before I started taking the risk.
And certainly for the state bar associations to kind of catch up and have some guidance for people. So for those who, I can put it in again if folks joined late, but I did put a link in the chat to a box folder where we have compiled a number of state and local jurisdiction bar associations and their ethics opinions on AI. Frankly, a lot of that more has to do with using AI as a drafting tool and as a tool, and whether you need to communicate that with your clients and fee schedules and whatnot that aren't necessarily applicable for this particular audience. But the bigger and broader questions still are apropos, i.e. particularly around work product confidentiality and issues like that, that these are just issues that we can't just run kind of headlong into, but need to really have a concerted and thoughtful approach. Am I saying that right, Bruce?
I think that's great. I hope people are sufficiently, scared that before you start willy-nilly playing around with clients' confidential information, you figure out what you're inputting this into.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm going to just note that we're getting close to our regular time, but if folks have questions, please put them in the chat for us to be able to address to Andrew, Bruce, or Chris. And I think that, so in terms of, if a lawyer is, and I'm sticking with you, Bruce, for a minute, if a lawyer is using generative AI, like even just a ChatGPT for assistance, say with drafting or helping to just wordsmith something, is that the level at which you have to get informed consent from a client? Is that considered more like it's okay to do that, or to, like, at what level does a client have to be informed that I'm using this additional tool to help me in my representation?
If it's ChatGPT, my understanding is that is a self-learning tool and it's acquiring your information. So what are you inputting in order to help you draft? I assume you're inputting stuff that has client information and it's confidential. And so I don't think you can do that without the client's okay. And frankly, if I were the client, given what I know about ChatGPT, I would be wondering why you're not just drafting it yourself, because the quality of writing by chat. It's one thing if you're asking it to put the Miranda opinion in the form of a limerick, which I've asked it to do, and but if you're asking it actually to write something that you're gonna use, I don't think it's so great at this point.
I did have it draft a poem about my cat Lily in the style of Emily Dickinson. It did quite nice, but yeah, that is not something I'm going to put into a brief. That's for sure. So I think there are. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
I just wanted to chime in and say, so we don't get sued by OpenAI. ChatGPT actually does have versions that are not self-learning and don't train on your data. So I'm fine using it as the placeholder for kind of AI companies. But there are products available from ChatGPT that don't use it and that have higher quality output. So I did just want to say that. But I also wanted to plug using it for poetry. Any of these tools, those are the great. I see people saying we're scared in the chat. And I think yeah, there's things to be scared about as far as, like Bruce was saying, if you're willy-nilly just going in there and letting it make decisions for you, yes, that is horrifying. But creating a poem about your cat, not as scary. Actually quite cute and fun. So I highly recommend getting in there and familiarizing yourself with it. Putting the Miranda in a limerick is an even better law-themed idea as a way to get engaged. And you can really start to see how powerful it is or some of its limitations as well and say, oh, well, that's not what I would do if I made a limerick about the Miranda. And then, I think Andrew was talking about this earlier. I like to think of AI as a clay sculpture, and it can help you remove a lot of the bulk of clay, but at the end you're going in and you're doing the fine detailing and you're making it look the final human, taking it from a blob to a final sculpture. And that's what it really feels like when you've successfully carried out a project on AI. For me, is I have a sculpture and I love to look at it and I want to start a new project now on AI. So don't be scared, get in there, make poetry about your cats. That's what I wanted to say. I'll shut up now.
There you go. And other than we know about ChatGPT, and thank you, Andrew, now we know about CoCounsel, are there other publicly available LLMs that folks should know about, Chris, to be able to try to do that experimenting safely without any violations of client confidentiality or other issues?
So safely, I mean, I think you have to be aware of what you're using and if it's training or not. But to get in there and start playing up, the big one that I like to compare to ChatGPT is Anthropic's Claude. If you have not played with Claude, it is an excellent tool. Why people like it is it tends to have a more human feeling for things like poetry or creative work or picking up nuance as well. I know some lawyers have expressed that it was able to pick up nuances that ChatGPT wasn't, for instance, able to pick up. Another great website that every AI person is going to be aware of, and it's a great place to kind of see what is possible out there in the world of AI, is Hugging Face. Hugging Face is a website where you can go and there's spaces where you can try out different AI models on things like computer vision tasks or generative AI, generative vision and stuff like that. So you can really, it's an awesome time to be alive and an awesome time to go check out Hugging Face.
And Chris, if you could put some of those in the chat, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Bruce, I always want to make sure you have the last word whenever I'm in a conversation with you. Is there any other kind of glaring issues that lawyers in particular should be aware of when trying to engage in some of these tools, even if it's on the kind of just for some of the documentation review, like as Andrew was saying?
No, I mean, look, in the end of the day, what lawyers have that is judgment. And, I don't know the quality of the, proposed deposition questions that get spit out or whatever. I mean, in some ways, these tools not only make things efficient, but spare you of things that make you die of boredom, and are potentially really great. But if then they weren't sitting in the deposition, they don't know with what level of certainty or uncertainty people spoke. They don't really know your theory of the case necessarily and how things fit in. And if you're not either at the deposition or reviewing the transcripts yourself, I think there's a lot of risk that you're missing things. And so I do think, there's a lot of great tools, but if something's calling for your judgment, they're not going to be a substitute for judgment, and that's sort of the competence point.
Right, and I think that's an incredibly important point to kind of end on, and I appreciate that so much, Bruce, that none of this is at all meant to be, should be, or ever will be, I hope, a substitute for your own evaluation of a particular area. So I am launching our poll. We would ask that folks please, complete the survey before before exiting for us, so that we can report this back. And so there's a question in the chat. Thank you, Destiny. Has anyone here implemented AI in their daily operational tasks?
If you count email as an operational task, then yes, every single email and even chats now these days are getting Grammarly or Claude or something on it.
That's true. Yep. Grammarly is always telling me that I'm doing something wrong. So there's that. Right. And
I know a
there's
lot of folks will use it to clean up like handwritten notes or just informal meeting minute notes. Like if you need to polish something up really quick, that's like a daily operational task that I see come up a lot.
Zoom AI transcripts is something at the Quattrone Center we try to use on as much as we possibly can. Yeah, just freeing up your hands during a meeting is another revolution in my mind. Ryan, can you elaborate on what you're using it for in Excel? That sounds exciting. If you don't mind, I saw that you said you're using AI for your daily operational tasks.
Sure, yeah. So I'm just going to unmute and talk if that's okay. I'm not a lawyer. I'm the operations manager here at Innocence Project of Texas. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm using it all the time for if there are advanced Excel tasks that I personally don't know how to use. A lot of formula type stuff, we've got a new intake attorney here at IPTX, and she's got a lot of sort of segregated information, a lot of different spreadsheets that need to be tied together. And it's stuff that I know is possible, but I don't know how exactly to do it. And the great thing is all I have to do is pop open ChatGPT. I would explain the problem like I was talking to someone who was an Excel master, and it will reply, give me some lowdown on like what it's going to tell me how to do, but then often it will just give me the formula that I can paste in, use it. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't, I'll go back to ChatGPT. I'll say, hey, this didn't work. Here's what it's saying. And usually within 2 or 3, volleys, we'll get exactly what we need. I was able to help an attorney. Yeah, this intake attorney, we did a massive mail merge. We created hundreds of named PDF files, got the things sent out. I mean, it was really amazing what it was able to do in terms of automation.
Okay, so in a month from now, Ryan Hamilton from Innocence Project of Texas will be hosting our webinar on AI in Excel. So
there you go.
Thanks, Ryan.
Cool. Yeah, of course.
But so everybody, please join me in thanking Andrew, thanking Bruce for joining us today for a very timely and important discussion. So thank you so much for your time. We're so grateful. Next month, I believe we are back to DNA. Dina Thompson will be back with a topic that she's been working on with her experts. And then following that, we will have in April a discussion of a collaborative investigation in Indiana with the Marion County District Attorney's Office Conviction Integrity Unit that ended in a successful exoneration, and talking more about how defense lawyers and prosecutors can work together collaboratively to get to justice. So we thank everybody for your time. It was great to have you with us.
Bye. Thank you.